I'm an American who's been traveling the world and living abroad for nearly 2 years, but I haven't yet had the privilege of visiting Denmark. Bearing that in mind, in this video, we will be reacting to Danish culture shocks that Americans simply can't comprehend.
Okay, since the last video was so popular, I'm going to do another edition of culture shocks since moving to Denmark. One of the first things that I noticed is that the aging population here is much more vibrant. Like people who are in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, 90s are like out and about, they're biking around, they're having a good time, all that stuff. It's really, really endearing to see. And they just look so much healthier. I don't know like what's going on in America. Well, I do know, but yeah, so that's something I've noticed. And the teenagers here have far more freedom. I mean, there's like 16, 17, 18-year-olds just out on the street in the middle of the day getting a kebab. Late at night when I'm coming home from a party, they're like on the metro and on the train as well. And I think it's like a much safer place to be a teenager with like the relaxed or the lower drinking age, I guess. And you can party safely and transport it safely, all that stuff. So I don't know, I'm glad to see that as well, because I think the high drinking age in the United States and the fact that everyone is like car dependent breeds like a lot of really unsafe decision making when you're a teenager. Another thing is like dogs on leashes. I don't know what the leash laws are in Copenhagen area municipality, but okay, sorry, I got distracted because from where I'm sitting, this house just looks like half a house. Like someone literally cut it in half, like right there. I don't know what the leash laws are here, but in California, at least they're super strict. Like your dog can never be off a leash, and I've seen tons of dogs here off leash, just like walking next to their owner on the street, which I think is really cute, and the dog seems to be well behaved. So. And the last thing for this edition is like the frozen food section in the grocery store. I feel like is really small. Like you won't find so many frozen foods here versus in the US. There's like 3 large aisles of freezers, all with frozen foods. Get maybe like a baguette or some fish or something, but it's not really like ready to eat lean cuisine type of meals that you would find in the States.
Older people being more active is something that I found to be a major culture shock when I was in the Netherlands. I lived in the Netherlands for 14 months, and as the time went on, I noticed that pretty much every weekend, I would see these groups of older people. And when I say older, I'm 25 years old as I film this video. I don't mean 35 or 45. I'm talking people who look like they're around my grandma's age, which would mean they're in their 80s or 70s. That's something you never really see in the US. Occasionally, you might see an older person walking around the mall or something like that. I know that's something that my dad's done in the past. He would just go to the mall to walk laps, and that's how he would get his cardio in. But to her point about car dependency, and that's something I will touch on here in a second, it makes it very difficult for elderly people in the US to get any sort of meaningful exercise within the flow of their day-to-day lives. And this isn't just exclusive to older people. This is applicable to everyone of every age demographic. Because you have to rely on the car to get to any destination beyond your immediate neighborhood, and even sometimes within your immediate neighborhood, you need a car to get to a destination. You just don't get as much incidental exercise, as Not Just Bikes likes to call it, the gym of life. We don't really have that in the US, and for what it's worth, we don't really have that here in Malaysia either, at least where I'm filming this video here in Cyberjaya. Now, as far as teenagers having more freedom, again, this really just comes down to the lack of car dependency, and it's so fascinating because in the US, turning 16, depending on what state you're from, is a major milestone because 16 is the cutoff age for being able to get your driver's license. And for most American teenagers, the idea of getting your license and subsequently getting your own car is a major step forward in your journey to being a self-sufficient adult. And I was once in that position. I remember the day I got my license. It was October of 2016. I felt like I had taken a quantum leap forward in my life. But then I visited Europe and I realized that actually that whole ideology of a car representing freedom is kind of a scam, because realistically, without a car, you don't have that freedom. So you literally have to get a car. You have to get this device that costs tens of thousands of dollars. I know in Denmark specifically, cars tend to be very expensive from what I've heard. You have to pay all of this money, usually involving pulling out loans with interest, to get this thing just so that you can survive, just so that you can work at a job, so on and so forth. And without it, you're pretty much screwed, or you have to rely on someone else who does have a car. True freedom is not needing a car, but still having access to them. And for whatever reason, a lot of people who are critical of more people-centric infrastructure seem to not understand that not needing a car does not necessarily mean that cars are just not allowed. You watching this video, you probably have a car or have had a car at some point in your life. And if you haven't, you know someone who does, even though you live in Denmark or somewhere near Denmark. Because you have access to cars, just like Americans do. The difference is Americans don't have access to the biking lanes and the general people scale infrastructure like you do. To me, having options is true freedom. Now, speaking of freedom, dogs off of leashes, I'm not gonna lie, I don't really know how I feel about this. Look, I love dogs. I love animals in general. I'm vegan. Okay, I love animals and I do hope to have multiple pets one day. But if and when my girlfriend and I do get pets, dogs in particular, I am never ever taking the dogs out without a leash. I'm just never going to do it unless we're at a dog park in a designated area where that is explicitly allowed. Now, this person in the comments right here says that the law is that all dogs must be kept on a leash, but we do not report each other for not doing so. So it does make sense that that would be a law. And I guess it also makes sense that if you have control over your dog, then maybe you wouldn't necessarily abide by that law all the time, even though I know that Danish people tend to be very, very rule-following people. I guess this is kind of an exception. And to be fair, dogs do deserve some degree of freedom. I'm saying this because recently I saw this absolutely traumatic video, which I will not link in the description because I don't want you or anyone else to see this, but I saw a video of a dog who had gotten loose in New York and had grabbed hold of a baby. And this baby couldn't have been older than maybe 2 years old at the absolute most. I mean, the baby basically crawled away when they finally pulled the dog off of them. And I can imagine that would have been a traumatic experience as a child. And to me, the dog owner in that case is the irresponsible one for not having the dog secure and on a leash. But I guess, again, it's really not about having the dog on a leash. It's about training the dog to not do that sort of thing. Now, as far as the frozen food options, I feel like this makes sense in the context of European society because, at least in my experience, I feel like European people typically like to cook fresh food. However, I will say that in my journey of living alone and or living with my girlfriend, I have discovered the magic of frozen vegetables and frozen fruit. Basically, they usually freeze them while they are at their peak ripeness and they pick them when they're in season. So actually, fun fact, frozen vegetables tend to have the same nutritional density as unfrozen vegetables. And we have frozen broccoli in the freezer right now. All we need to do is microwave it for a couple of minutes and we're good. Tastes just as good, if not better, than fresh broccoli. But as far as the pre-made meals, yeah, that's something that I think the US definitely has a problem with and needs to address.
Here are 5 facts that will shock you about Denmark if you're not from the country. I'm Italian and I've been living in Copenhagen for 2.5 years. The number one thing that shocked me the most when I moved to Copenhagen was the fact that Danes leave their babies sleeping outside in strollers when they are most often eating at a cafe or at a restaurant. And they do this even in the winter, actually especially in the winter, because they believe it's good for the baby to get fresh air and also to build immunitary defenses. The shocking thing is that this is done unattended. Some of them do put a baby monitor inside the strollers, but overall any passerby could literally come by and take the stroller with them. It's just that the crime rate in Denmark is really low. Like in general, like there's a lot of trust in the system and in the society, so Danish parents do just believe that they can leave their babies in the stroller and that will be completely fine and safe. And it's so common that sometimes you will even find a queue of strollers parked outside of a cafe with babies sleeping inside. Then the second one is winter bathing. It's quite common for Danes to go take a dip into the sea, even in the winter, actually especially in the winter again, and because they consider this to be a good practice for the body, to strengthen it and so on. Quite often they do a little bit of sauna first, and there's a lot of saunas in the city that are placed along the coast, so they go in the sauna and then they dip into the sea for a few seconds, up to 1 minute, and then they would come back into the sauna to warm up. But they would do this even when the temperature is below 0, so like absolutely freezing. I've tried to do it once and then I got a really bad sore throat the days afterwards, so I don't think it's built for my Italian body, but they do think it's good for your body, so they're quite good at it. The third one is, you can see that I have curtains in my apartment, but Danes normally don't. So they value so much natural light coming inside their houses that they're happy just not to have curtains and to give up on their privacy. So if you walk around the city and you look up at apartments, you can completely always see what's going on, what's the life inside the house day and night, and they are completely fine with that. The next one is biking in the rain. So Danes will bike no matter what, rain or hail, snow or shine, doesn't matter. They wear a raincoat and also rain pants on top of their normal clothes, and then they would just bike and do their commute to work and anything as if the weather was completely fine. So for them, biking is just a form of transport, just like taking a car or taking the train. They don't consider it as just something you would do when it's good weather, like maybe for most of the other European countries that are not that bike skilled. So I think that's like super fascinating. Definitely not for me, but I absolutely admire them for it. And the last one, which I always find quite funny, is the fact that they use the Danish flag for everything. So not only is it's placed on every item in the supermarket you could think of, from like fresh produce to any kind of packaged food that is produced in Denmark. So you would find a Danish flag on carrots, on a cucumber, on a pack of pasta, on everything. But even funnier is that they use it to wave at the arrivals at the airport to kind of celebrate who is coming back, flying back into the country. And especially they use it as a symbol for celebration of birthdays. So when you book at a restaurant and it's somebody's birthday, you can also ask them already in the booking to place a flag, a small flag on top of the table, because that's just like a symbol that it's somebody's birthday. And also equally, you know, you would put that on a birthday cake, or you would wave that while you sing happy birthday. And you know, the bunting that you would put to decorate the house, instead of saying happy birthday, it's like a bunting of Danish flags. I think that's super adorable and definitely something that initially we wouldn't do. That was everything for today. Let me know if you're curious to know more fun facts about Denmark overall, and also if you knew any of these.
Leaving the strollers outside, it does still trip me out just a little bit, even though I know statistically the probability of anything bad happening to your child is very low in a country like Denmark. And I mean, this person in the comments right here said the last baby kidnapping was in 1967, and the kid was returned unharmed. A mentally ill woman who had a miscarriage had taken it. So I mean, since 1967, that's a pretty good track record. The odds are in your favor. But for me, I mean, look, I don't have any kids, but I feel like unless the odds are literally 0%, I personally wouldn't do it. But I understand why you would, because I'm thinking from my American frame of mind that it's still possible for something to happen. And for what it's worth, I don't think I ever saw this anywhere in Europe that I went to. Again, I spent most of my time in the Netherlands, but I've also been to London, I've been to Zurich, I've been to Antwerp. I have never come across that particular thing. I think that might just be a Danish thing in particular. So props to you for having a high trusting, safe society. But that's something that I don't know if I would be able to come around to. Now, as far as winter bathing, I find this really, really cool because I've been taking cold showers on and off for pretty much my entire adult life. I think I discovered cold showers in around 2018-ish, so 7 or 8 years ago. And to her point, I heard that cold showers can boost your immune system. And while I still have gotten sick throughout the years, they've at least reduced the severity of the illnesses that I had, especially the common cold. Usually I get a cold and it'll be gone in about 2 days at the absolute most, instead of the 4 days that it would have lasted before. Now, as far as not having curtains, that's another thing that I don't really know if I can really come around to because I value my privacy tremendously. I mean, you can see in the background right now, I have the curtains open, and technically anybody in the adjacent apartment building could probably look directly into our window and see exactly what we're doing, which is why generally I like to keep the curtains closed, or at least closed enough to where they can't see inside or see us inside. But I also noticed this to be the case in the Netherlands, that people, if they did have curtains, would generally leave the curtains all the way open. And not only that, but there are no tints on the windows, which makes sense because just like Denmark, the Netherlands doesn't receive a whole lot of sunlight. So you can literally see straight through people's houses as you bike past them in the Netherlands. I guess it's the same in Denmark. And I don't know if it's really a thing in Denmark for people to look inside of each other's houses, but from what I understand in the Netherlands, that is kind of a thing, that people will just casually glance into people's homes. And it's not like they're just sitting there staring through the window like this, but they'll do a quick little glance and I guess see what the other people are up to. I don't really know. I kind of tried not to do that myself, but it's hard when the windows are that clear and that big, which, by the way, I'm assuming Denmark is the same way. I really love how in Europe, especially in the countries that don't receive a whole lot of sunlight, you tend to have very large windows. That is one of the key components of my ideal house aesthetic, which, by the way, I recently read a book about living in Denmark. The book was called The Year of Living Danishly. And the author mentioned that Danish people have a great aptitude and affinity for interior design, which is something that, for whatever reason, I just never really expected. I kind of expected Danish people, like Dutch people, to just be very pragmatic. But no, Danish people place a lot of emphasis on the aesthetics of their homes, which makes sense because, especially in the winter, those long, long winters, you spend a lot of time at home. Now, as far as biking in the rain, in the Netherlands, they have a saying, "Jij bent niet van suiker gemaakt," which basically translates to, "You're not made of sugar." So go out in the rain, you're not gonna melt, you'll be fine. Let me know if you have a similar saying in Danish, because I'm willing to bet that you do. I'm willing to bet that you have your own version of that exact saying. And honestly, in a climate like that of that part of Europe, from the Netherlands to, I guess, the UK and Ireland, all the way up through the Nordics, it's kind of impossible to avoid cycling in the rain because it rains so frequently. I don't know how many days of rain you get in Denmark, but I know in the Netherlands, it rained probably 3 days a week for my entire 14 months there. Some weeks I would get a little bit more, other weeks there'd be a little bit less, but on average, probably about 3 days a week. And if you're riding your bike every day, eventually you're gonna ride your bike in the rain, but you'll survive. Because the rain that you get over there is not really torrential downpour rain like we see here in Malaysia, where we literally have thunderstorms every single afternoon, and that is no exaggeration. Now, as far as the Danish flag being everywhere, this is yet another thing that I read about in the Year of Living Danishly book that really threw me off, because I hear a lot of European people, and maybe it's not necessarily Danish people, it might be people from other parts of Europe, but I hear a lot of European people say that Americans are overly nationalistic or that it's kind of strange that when they go to the US, they see the American flag everywhere. Apparently, Denmark is very similar in terms of national pride. If not, you might even exceed it, because in the book, the author told this story about how she tried to hang up, I think it was a Swiss flag, on her flagpole at the home that she was living at. The author, for what it's worth, was British, so she did not know that she wasn't allowed to do this, but she hung up a Swiss flag to make her Swiss friend who was visiting her feel more welcomed. And when she got back to her house, there was just a group of people staring at her flag. And when she got out of the car, they informed her that it was actually illegal to hang any flag other than the Danish flag. Now, I don't know how accurate that is. Let me know in the comments if there's more to it than that. But that blew my mind, because to my knowledge, that is definitely not a thing in the US. I'm pretty sure you're allowed to hang pretty much whatever flag you want, probably because the country is comprised primarily of immigrants or descendants of immigrants.